I was sitting on his desk, my fingers wrapped around his tie, pulling him closer. Books were falling from the shelves behind us. The door was locked. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and the hallways of the literature department were completely empty. He whispered, his breath warm against my neck. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, quote 1, "That was a lie. My name is Emma. I'm 27 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. And this is the story of how I fell for my professor. I'm about to tell you something I've never told anyone, not even my closest friends. This happened 5 years ago, when I was 22 and in my final year at university. I was studying graphic design, spending my days in studios covered in paint and ink, wearing vintage band shirts and ripped jeans. I had red hair back then, longer than it is now, freckles across my nose that I never bothered to cover up. I was single at the time, fresh out of a relationship with some guy from my design classes who couldn't decide what he wanted. I was restless, bored, looking for something that felt real. That semester, I took an elective, Modern American Literature. I needed the credits, and honestly, I thought it would be easy. Show up, read some books, write some essays. I wasn't expecting Professor Collins. He walked into that lecture hall on the first day of the semester, and I noticed him immediately. He was 34 years old, which seemed so much older than me at the time. Dark hair starting to gray at the temples, black framed glasses, a tweed blazer over a white button down shirt. He had this whole academic charm thing going on, like he'd stepped out of some old university in England. When he started talking about Kerouac and the Beat Generation, his voice was deep, steady, passionate. He didn't just teach literature, he lived it. I stayed after the first lecture to ask him about the syllabus, just a simple question about one of the reading assignments. He looked at me, really looked at me, and smiled. "You're Emma, right? I saw your name on the roster. Graphic design major?" I was surprised he knew. "Yeah? How do you know?" He gestured to my sketchbook, covered in stickers and doodles. "Creative types have a certain look. Plus, your work's been featured in the student gallery. I've seen it. You're talented." That was the first time we really spoke. I walked out of that lecture hall feeling something I couldn't quite name. The lectures became my favorite part of the week. I'd sit in the third row, right in his line of sight, and I'd watch him pace back and forth, talking about Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Plath. He'd quote entire passages from memory, his hands moving as he spoke, his eyes lighting up when someone asked a good question. I started staying after class more often. At first, it was about the essays, about understanding the assignments. But then it became something else. We'd talk about books, about writing, about why stories matter. He'd recommend authors I'd never heard of. I'd tell him about my design projects, and he'd actually listen, ask questions, give feedback. One afternoon in late September, after a lecture on Sylvia Plath, I stayed behind, like usual. The other students filtered out, and it was just the two of us in that big empty hall. He was packing up his notes, and I walked down to the front. "Quote 5, I said. He looked up, smiled. "Quote 6, I shrugged. "Quote 7, he nodded slowly. "Quote 8, there was something in the way he said it, not judgmental, appreciative. "Quote 9, I asked. He shook his head. "Quote 10, we started having longer conversations after class. He'd tell me about why he became a professor, about growing up in Boston, about the year he spent in Paris trying to write a novel that never got published. I'd tell him about my art, about wanting to move to New York after graduation, about feeling stuck in Austin, even though I loved it. There was this ease between us, like we'd known each other longer than a few weeks. But there was also tension, the kind you feel in your chest when someone stands too close, the kind that makes you hyper aware of every word, every glance. It was a Friday in early October when everything changed. He'd asked me to come to his office to discuss my thesis project. I was doing a visual essay combining graphic design and literary analysis, and he'd offered to help me with the literature side. His office was in the old humanities building, third floor, at the end of a long hallway lined with bookshelves. I got there at 7 in the evening. The building was nearly empty. Most professors had gone home for the weekend. I knocked on his door, and he called out, "Come in." His office was exactly what you'd imagine: floor to ceiling bookshelves crammed with novels, poetry collections, academic journals, a heavy wooden desk covered in papers and coffee mugs, a small window overlooking the campus. It smelled like old paper and coffee and something else, maybe his cologne, something woody and warm. He was sitting behind his desk when I walked in, but he stood up immediately. Quote 12, I set my bag down. Quote 13, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. Quote 14, we talked about my project for maybe 20 minutes. He had notes, suggestions, ideas for authors I could reference. But then the conversation drifted. He asked about my design work, about my plans after graduation. I asked him about his novel, the one he never finished. I asked. He leaned back in his chair. There was something sad in his voice. He shrugged. Quote 18. I looked at him. Quote 19. He laughed. Quote 20. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up, walked over to a small cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a bottle of red wine and two glasses. Quote 21. I smiled. Quote 22. He poured two glasses and handed me one. We weren't talking about my thesis anymore. We were talking about life, about choices, about the difference between what you want and what you're supposed to want. The wine loosened us both up. I tucked my legs under me in the chair. He took off his blazer, rolled up his sleeves. The office felt smaller, warmer. At some point, I looked at my phone. It was 9 o'clock. I should probably go, I said, but I didn't move. He looked at me. Neither of us moved. The air between us felt heavy, charged. He stood up, walked around the desk, leaned against it right in front of me. Quote 25, he said quietly. Quote 26. He didn't finish the sentence. I stood up, and suddenly we were close, too close. I could see the flecks of gray in his eyes behind his glasses. This is what? I asked. My heart was pounding. He shook his head. You should go. I took a step closer. I don't want to. He let out a long breath. Emma, this isn't right. I reached up, adjusted his glasses slightly, just to touch him. I'm 22. I'm an adult, and I want this. He closed his eyes for a second. If anyone finds out, I cut him off. No one's going to find out. Then I kissed him. Just leaned in and kissed him. For a second, he didn't respond, and I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. But then his hand moved to the back of my neck, and he kissed me back, hard, urgent, like he'd been holding back for weeks and couldn't anymore. He pulled away, breathing hard. We can't do this. I looked at him. But you want to. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the door and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking felt impossibly loud. When he turned back to me, something had shifted. He crossed the room in 2 steps, and then his hands were on my waist, lifting me onto his desk. Papers scattered to the floor. I grabbed his tie, pulled him closer. He kissed me again, slower this time, his hands in my hair. I could feel the edge of the desk against my thighs, the rough texture of his shirt under my fingers. A book fell from the shelf behind us. Then another. We didn't care. His lips moved to my neck, and I tilted my head back, breathing hard. "If someone comes in," he whispered. I pulled his face back to mine. "They won't." My hands found the buttons of his shirt. His found the hem of mine. The room was spinning, or maybe I was. All I could think about was how badly I'd wanted this, how long the tension had been building. His glasses were crooked. I took them off, set them carefully on the desk beside me. Without them, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "Quote 38, he said, his voice rough. I didn't let him finish. I kissed him again, wrapped my legs around him, pulled him as close as possible. We stayed in that office until almost midnight. Afterwards, we sat on the floor, backs against his desk, trying to catch our breath. My hair was a mess. His shirt was half unbuttoned. We didn't talk for a long time. Finally, he said. I looked at him. But we both knew it was a lie. It happened again 3 days later. I texted him something simple about a question on the reading. He replied, quote, 41 I went. This time, we didn't even pretend to talk about literature. The door locked behind me, and we were on each other immediately. It became a pattern. I'd text, he'd respond. I'd show up at his office, or he'd wait for me in the parking lot behind the humanities building after his evening lectures. We'd drive to his car, parked in the far corner where no one went, and the windows would fog up while we talked and kissed and lost track of time. We were careful. We never acknowledged each other differently in class. I didn't stay after lectures anymore, didn't want to draw attention. We didn't meet on campus during the day, but the secrecy made it more intense. Every glance across the lecture hall felt loaded. Every email about assignments had a double meaning. I was living two lives. In one, I was Emma the student, the graphic designer, the girl with paint under her fingernails. In the other, I was his, the only person who knew what he looked like without his glasses, how he took his coffee, what he sounded like when he laughed. By mid-November, we were meeting off campus. There was this motel about 30 minutes outside Austin, one of those places off the highway that no one pays attention to. We'd meet there on Friday nights. He'd text me the room number, and I'd show up an hour later. We'd order takeout, drink wine from plastic cups, talk about everything except the fact that what we were doing could ruin his career. Those nights felt separate from real life. In that motel room, we weren't professor and student. We were just two people who couldn't stay away from each other. He told me things he said he'd never told anyone, about his ex-wife, about how the divorce had nearly broken him, about how he'd moved to Austin to start over. I told him about my family, about my fear that I wasn't good enough, that my art didn't matter. He'd listen, really listen, in a way no one my age ever had. Quote 42, he'd say, brushing hair out of my face. You're already doing them? I wanted to believe him. But there were moments when reality crept in, like when we'd be in his car, and he'd suddenly pull away if another car drove past. Or when I'd see him on campus, talking to other professors, laughing, casual, and I'd remember that I was a secret that no one could know. It didn't bother me at first. The secrecy felt romantic, thrilling. But slowly, it started to feel like something else, like shame. The beginning of the end came in early December. We'd gotten careless. We went to dinner at a restaurant in a town 40 minutes away, thinking we were far enough from campus that it didn't matter. We sat in a corner booth, his hand covering mine on the table. We were talking about Christmas break, about how we'd miss each other. I was laughing at something he'd said when I saw her, a girl from my design classes, sitting 3 tables away. She looked at me, then at him, then back at me. Her eyes widened. I pulled my hand away from his, but it was too late. She'd seen. He didn't notice. I didn't tell him. But the next week, I heard the whispers. People in my classes asking if it was true, if I was hooking up with Professor Collins. I denied it. But the rumors spread anyway. Someone must have said something to someone else, and then it was everywhere. I texted him. People are talking. He called me immediately. What do you mean people are talking? I told him about the restaurant, about the girl, about the rumors. There was a long silence. This is bad, Emma. This is really bad. His voice was different, panicked, distant. What do we do? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Underscore quote, underscore 48, underscore. My chest tightened. Quote 49. But I wanted him to fight for it. He didn't. We didn't talk for 2 weeks. I went to his lectures and sat in the back. He didn't look at me. I texted him late at night and he wouldn't respond. I felt like I was disappearing. Then, right before finals, he asked me to meet him. Same motel, same room. I went because I needed to see him. Needed to know if what we had was real or if I'd imagined it. When I got there, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Quote 50, I stood in the doorway. Quote 51, he looked up. Quote 52, I felt something crack inside me. Quote 53, he stood up, walked toward me. Quote 54, I shook my head. Quote 55, he didn't have an answer. I told him I'd leave. I'd transfer schools, finish my degree somewhere else. Make the whole thing go away. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Quote 56, I shrugged. Quote 57, he didn't stop me. That's what hurt the most. He just nodded, said, quote 58. I walked out of that motel room and didn't look back. I didn't transfer, but I didn't see him again either. I finished the semester, took my exams, avoided the humanities building entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he'd requested a transfer to another university. By the time the spring semester started, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. I graduated that May, moved to Dallas for a job, tried to forget. But here's the thing, I never really did forget. Even now, 5 years later, I'll see someone wearing a tweed blazer or black framed glasses, and I'll think of him. I'll smell old books and coffee, and I'm back in that office, sitting on his desk, his hands in my hair. I'm in a relationship now, with someone my own age, someone who's safe and kind, and doesn't make me feel like a secret. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if we'd been braver, if he'd fought for us, if I'd stayed. I don't regret it. I know I'm supposed to, but I don't. It was messy and complicated and probably wrong, but it was real. At least, it felt real to me. I don't know if it felt the same to him. I guess I never will. So, to anyone listening, here's what I learned. When something's forbidden, it burns hotter. But that doesn't mean it burns longer. Sometimes, the things that feel the most intense are the ones that disappear the fastest. And sometimes, you have to let them.